In this video, you'll be learning how to use the crime analysis solution in ArcGIS Pro to support the automation of your daily data imports from your records management or your computer-aided dispatch system. My name is Chris Delaney. I'm the product owner for Esri Law Enforcement Solutions. Many crime analysts face a similar problem every day when they come into work. They need to get data that lives in their systems of record into GIS to perform analysis. That data generally lives in records management systems or computer-aided dispatch systems. Sometimes analysts have access to those systems directly and can access the underlying database tables that power those systems. And sometimes they get nightly extracts made by a DBA in the form of a spreadsheet or a CSV dumped to a network drive. That data subsequently needs to be taken by the analyst. Selections and sub-selections need to be made. They need to geocode that data to be able to turn the X and Y data or the address information in those tables into geometry. And then they need to append those new records into an existing GIS layer that they have. And that may exist either in a hosted feature service, either as part of their ArcGIS Online organization or their ArcGIS Enterprise organization, or it may be a local shapefile or file geodatabase feature class that lives on a network drive or on their personal computer. This daily challenge is extremely time-consuming for analysts, and many analysts spend a lot of time in this laborious, duplicative workflow when automating that process can be a significant time saver and can really free them up to do a lot more meaningful analysis work. So in this video, you're going to see a number of relatively new tools that are available to support the automation of those daily data import workflows. Those tools are going to include ArcGIS Pro 2.7, and in particular, the Update Features with Incident Records tool. You'll find that is part of the crime analysis solution and in the crime analysis and safety toolbox, as well as the new scheduling capabilities of ArcGIS Pro. You'll also need to be able to apply those tools. You will need your source data, i.e. the database table from your system of record or the spreadsheets or CSVs that you use to be able to take and turn into GIS layers on a daily basis. You'll also need an existing target layer for that data to go to. So that could be a local file or it could be a web layer. If you're going to be geocoding addresses, you'll also need an address locator. If your data already has X and Y coordinates, you can just use the ones that are provided as part of, that come from the records management system or from the CAD system. So let's hop right in to see how to use these tools to automate your data import workflows. So here we are in ArcGIS Pro. First, I want to take a look at the input tables that we're going to be pulling data from and the web layer that we're going to be appending data into. So to start off, we'll go to the catalog pane, and under the project tab, I have in this ArcGIS Pro project a database folder. And you'll see in this database folder that I have a connection to a database called Crime Database. And in that Crime Database connection, there's a table called Violent Crime Linked. In this example, I've made a connection to Microsoft Access, but you could just as easily connect to an Oracle, a SQL, any database connection, any database type that your records data lives in. I'm going to add this table to the map, and then I'm going to open it up so we can see what's inside of it. Looks like pretty standard crime data, information about addresses, time data, the types of crime, details about the crime, those types of things. This is a table that has last night's events in it. So the idea is that every single night, whenever there's new crimes that occur, this table is going to have them from the previous day. I want to take the data that's in this table and I want to add it into my existing web layer containing crimes. So where does that layer live? Like I said, it could be local, but in this case, it is in my ArcGIS online organization. So I can go to my portal, I can go to my content tab and find crimes web layer and add that to my map. Now, since this particular example is for demonstration only, this is currently an empty layer, but it's symbolized with standard styles for different types of crimes. And as you can see, it has a number of common fields as well that describe crimes. Although, as you'll notice, some of the field names are different than the field names within my violent crime linked source data itself. Now, before I go any further, I did want to mention a little bit more about the nature of this database connection. While many analysts will be able to directly connect to authoritative data sources, sometimes you need to be able to access an intermediate data source. And for that, many analysts will use Microsoft Access as a way to bring in tables from various databases and flatten them and reorganize them to be able to make them more ready for analysis. Now, ArcGIS Pro can support many of those purposes as well, but some analysts have comfort level with using Access, and ArcGIS Pro now supports being able to connect to Microsoft Access databases. So to do that, you can right-click on a database, New OLEDB Connection, and you'll see that I have two different drivers now. Microsoft Office 12 Access Database Engine OLEDB Provider. That driver will now allow me to access and make connections to Microsoft Access databases. That driver comes out of the box with Microsoft Office 365. So if you have Microsoft Office 365, you should already have access to this driver. If not, you might have to go search for it on the internet and add it to your computer. From there, you press the next button, and then you copy and paste the location of your Microsoft Access database where it says data source. And so here, as you can kind of see, I have my Access database in a folder on my desktop, and that's what I want to connect to. I can test that connection. It works. And now I have a new connection to that database, which is the same as my crime database connection that I showed before. So now let's set up the Update Features with Incident Records tool to show how you take the data from my input table and append it in to my crimes web layer table. To find the tool, you can do two things. If you have the crime analysis solution, you can click on the crime analysis ribbon, and you can go to the data management section and click the Import Incidents button. And this will open up the Update Features with Incident Records tool. Now, there's one other way to get this as well if you don't have the crime analysis solution. If you go to your geoprocessing pane and under the Toolboxes tab, you'll see a new toolbox called Crime Analysis and Safety Tools. Check the arrow to open up that toolbox, and you'll find the Update Features with Incident Records tool. The first thing that we will do with this tool is point to our input table. Our input table is the violent crime linked table that comes from our Access database connection. If we wanted to, we could opt to write in a SQL expression here to do additional filtering if that was relevant. In this case, I don't need to do that. I already have done it on the backside, so I don't need to do it here inside of the tool. Then we select the target web layer that we want to append data from the input table into, and that's this layer called Crimes. From there, we need to tell the tool what type of location information is in our data. Is it coordinates or addresses? If it's addresses, you have to define the type of address. Is it an address in one field or in many fields? If it's one field, you then pick your address locator. So if you were going to use the World Geocoding Service, which you could, but it costs credits, you could do that. Or you could open the folder to browse for your specific address locator. And then you would point the associated address in your data to the value that exists in your address locator. And so if your data had multiple fields, you do the same thing, but for each of the individual address parts. Now in this case, I'm not going to use addresses, I am going to use coordinates, and I already have X and Y data in my data set, so I'm just going to point to those fields. My data is in WGS 84, but if your data was in state plane or some other type of projection, you could account for that here. You can also then define a place that will create an invalid records log. Essentially, it will report for you all of the different records that may fail. Maybe they have a geocoding problem, or maybe they have fail to publish for some reason. Sometimes the lengths of the fields in your input table are longer than what's allowable in your output layers, and so you need to keep an eye on those types of things. So I'm just going to call this particular table invalidrecords.csv, and it's going to be placed in my geodatabase, default geodatabase inside the folder where the rest of my ArcGIS Pro project is. From there, I have a checkbox. You don't have to use this, but generally, for most workflows, you're going to want to. It's going to give you the ability to update existing target features. So what that means is if your nightly records that are coming in have changes to historical records, say a burglary that happened on Monday and it came in on Tuesday's extract, and the case status of that burglary was open, but then several days later, that case was closed, and now it's in the nightly extract again, and you want to not have two records in your output layer. You want to have one record that's been updated to reflect the change in case status. That's what this set of parameters do. So it enables you to define a unique ID field for each record, and in my case, it's going to be the case number of the crime, and then the associated value that exists in your output layer. And in that layer, the value is called offense ID. Same value, same type of field, same purpose. It just has different names in the input table versus the output layer. So once I do that, I could also optionally define modified date values for the input table and the target features. Essentially, that's going to let me know if you had a value that helped you know the last time that record was updated. We can incorporate that information into this matching process to ensure that only the freshest version of a record is the thing that persists. And then we can choose to update only matching features or update geometry if there's changes to geometry for existing features. But then the last part of the tool, I'm going to change. The last part of the tool is the matching the fields. So if your input table is identical in terms of the different field names to your output web layer, then you can leave the default, which says input fields must match target fields. But for most of us working through these workflows, the schema of your input data table, particularly coming from a database, is going to be different than the schema of your output layer for your GIS work. So we're going to use the Use Field Map to Reconcile Field Differences option, and that's going to open up the Field Mapping tool. And what we do in this tool is it's showing all of the field names of my output layer, and I'm going to map to each of those the associated field that I want the values from the input table added to. So for full ADDR, for example, that's the address field. I'm going to select address street full and then press add selected. For report date, I'm going to select reported timestamp and press add selected. For NIBR's offense, I'm going to select statute type, statute text. I'll add in a case status field, case underscore status. If it sees identical names, it automatically matches them. So X and Y are already matched. And that's, I think, pretty good for everything for right now. And then I'll match offense ID to case number. And then the last thing I have to do is, because it's matching a date value, it needs you to say what format your date is in. So I can come in back to the table. I can open up my date, and this ensures that your date is going to come over as a Esri date time field. So I can see the style of this date, and then I'm just going to use the calendar to pick the appropriate corresponding date type. So it looks like this one down here, third from the bottom, and the locale is the United States in English speaking. And so from there, I can run this tool, and it's going to take all of these 8 records that are in my violent crime linked table and geocode them and append them into my crimes web layer. So let's run that now. So my tool is just completed, and now I can see the new points on the map. And as I open up the attribute table for the output layer, I can see that the various fields that I inputted in are showing up. I have a report date, properly formatted, NIBRs, offense categories, and I've got a case status. So it looks like the tool worked correctly to take my non-spatial tabular data and render the XYs and append it into the existing layer. So that's great. That's the regular part of the workflow, but how do you actually go about automating that? Well, after you've run the Update Features with Incident Records tool manually the first time, come down to the tool and you'll see that there is an option to, if you click the little down arrow, you'll see that there's an option to schedule. And when you press the schedule button, you'll see the schedule Update Features with Incident Records interface. This is going to enable me to create a unique task name, select how often I want to run this tool automatically. So I would want to run it generally daily at something like 3:30 a.m. So really early in the morning, so that when I come into work in the morning, all of my data from the previous day have already been rendered and they're ready to go so I can start doing work. So from here, I can recur this as frequently as I want, in this case every day. And then when I press OK, what it's going to do is create a new Windows scheduled task. And so I can now go to Task Scheduler. And if I open up Task Scheduler, I will see that I have a new task, Update Features with Incident Records, and that's going to run every single day. So one thing to keep in mind with this, as I mentioned before, you may need additional administrative privileges to your local machine to run Windows scheduled tasks on your machine automatically. So consult with your IT department if you do not already have local administrative privileges, or if your group policy requires some additional security setting changes to your existing user account. But from here, you now have the fine-grained control of Windows Task Scheduler if you need to be able to control that task a little bit in a little bit greater detail. Now, what happens if you run this tool one time manually and then you forget where, you open this up and then all the parameters are empty? How do you get back to schedule a tool that you ran manually that you liked? You can come up to the Analysis ribbon, and if you click on the History button, you can see all of the your history of all of the different geoprocessing tools that you have run. And when you click one, it'll bring up that tool with exactly the parameters that you use to run it. And from there, you can use the schedule button to automate the running of that particular tool. So that is how you use the ArcGIS Update Features with Incident Records tool together with the powers of scheduling in ArcGIS Pro to be able to automate the process of data import from a database table or spreadsheet or CSV into a GIS layer. Now, many of you may have looked at this and thought, well, this is great, but I need to do other things as I prepare my data every single day before it's ready for GIS analysis. And of course, that makes sense. And so the way that you do that, the way that you can incorporate the update features with Incident Records tool with other types of geoprocesses that can clean and organize your data, is through a model. And you'll find models again on the Analysis tab of ArcGIS Pro under the Model Builder toolbar. And when you open that up, that's going to prompt you to create a new model. And building models are as simple as going to the geoprocessing pane, finding a tool that you want to use, like Update Features with Incident Records, and dragging and dropping it into the model interface. From there, you can bring in various data sets, and you can connect them visually as an input table, or you can double-click on the geoprocessing tool and see all of the parameters of the tool itself. You can then subsequently start to string these various tools together to start to create more robust multi-step geoprocessing models. So I'm going to delete that one and show you an example of what that looks like. So I've built a model that's called Daily Import Process, and it is doing a number of things to the data that I already showed you. First, it's going to take that data from my Access database and it's going to copy it into a temporary table in my default file geodatabase. And that is because I'm going to perform a couple of geoprocessing steps that act on the source data itself, and I can't do that when I have a linked table. So the first thing it's going to do is a time conversion, and that time conversion is going to fix my reported date time. Then I'm going to use the Add Date Attributes tool. That's going to enable me to create unique fields for each one of these different date parts. So a day of the week field, an hour field, a month field, a day of the month, and a year field. I'm then going to add a new field that I'm going to call Clean Address. And in that field, I'm going to create a calculation that strips out the exact address number and then puts in some wording for 00 block of. So instead of 123 Fake Street, I would have 100 block of Fake Street. And this is in case the analyst needs to be able to publish that data publicly for sharing. He or she has a field that they can use instead of giving an exact address. And then ultimately, that information comes into my Update Features with Incident Records tool to be able to create and publish in the data into my output layer. But this time with a cleaned address field and with an additional day of the week field and with a nicely converted time field. So I run all of this stuff together, and that information will run effectively. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to come back to the catalog pane. I'm going to right click on the model to open it, and then I'm going to press run. So now my model is finished, and as you can see, I have points in my crimes layer. And when I open up the attribute table, you'll see that now instead of a specific address, I have a stylized address that's anonymized. I have a nicely formatted reported date field, and then towards the end, you can see that I have a new day of week field that's been added as part of my geoprocessing. So there's a variety of different cleaning and standardizing steps that you could take and chain together with the update features from Incident Records tool. And once you've run that model correctly, you can do the same thing that you did with the geoprocessing tool, which is click the down button and then set that to run on a nightly schedule to be able to automate that process, dramatically saving you time and effort. So I hope you enjoyed this video on using the crime analysis solution and the update features with Incident Records tool to automate your data import processes for your RMS or CAD data. Just to recap, we used ArcGIS Pro 2.7 and the scheduling tools, the update features with Incident Records tool, and to learn a little bit more about those various capabilities, here are some resources to the help documentation for the crime analysis solution for the update features with Incident Records tool, a little bit more on learning how to schedule geoprocessing tools and building models And if you need a little bit of help because you are using Microsoft Access and you want to be able to create OLEDB connections to your Microsoft Access databases, this link to Esri's support site has documentation on how to do that. Thanks for watching this video. Hope to see you again on another one of our crime analysis solution video tutorials.